How do you explain this verdict?
Well, good question. How does anybody? They certainly seem inconsistent when you look at the evidence that was presented. It's anybody's guess how you could come back guilty on the homicide and not guilty on the mutilation of corpse. And that's one of the things we're going to have to look at in terms of whether there might be some motions after verdict.
Do you think that's some kind of compromise by the jury?
You'd have to ask jurors that, but the interest to us is the obvious sort of inconsistency of those verdicts on the evidence that was presented to the jury. Now, this was a jury that worked very hard. We have respected them from day one. It's been a very attentive jury. They spent a fair time in deliberation here, and so while we disagree in the end, it's not a matter of disrespect. I can't explain how one would arrive at what clearly seem to be inconsistent verdicts. It's not the first time that's ever happened, though, either.
Have you talked already or considered some post-conviction motions?
Well, it's early, but there's some obvious issues to address. The split in the verdicts here being only one, and the most recent of those. So we'll think about that after we get a chance to catch our breath, and I think we've got 30 days to file motions here after verdict.
Without violating any privilege or confidences between you and your client, did Stephen give you any reaction that he wanted you to deliver to us or anything of the sort? Or
well, let me say I spoke with him at length today before and in court briefly after the verdict, and I think I can say that he's obviously very disappointed, but he's not despondent, and he's not giving up. He's maintained his innocence from day one, and we'll do whatever we can to continue to press his cause. And let me also say publicly that we've learned there's what I think is a rather peculiar decision to transfer him back to Manitowoc. And if I assume they're doing that with the understanding that Manitowoc County will be held responsible if anything happens to him. They're responsible for his safety and his security. And so I don't know what else I can say about that, but should something happen while he's there, they take the risk of some very serious consequences.
Tonight is he going back to Manitowoc?
That's our understanding, that he'll be in the Manitowoc County Jail.
What are you suggesting might happen?
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just putting them on notice that they are responsible for his safety, and I expect that they will maintain his safety from anyone.
This is not a guy who's despondent. It's not a guy who's reacted violently here in any way. He's surely disappointed, but he's also had experience with the time that can pass sometimes before others accept your innocence. So he's in effect an old hand, unfortunately, at waiting out the criminal justice system to get it right in the end. So we were surprised by the decision. It's certainly a decision that the respective sheriff's departments have within their power to make. But it's surprising under the circumstances.
What are you guys thinking after 6 weeks, really a year since you've been involved, and what's going through your mind when that verdict's being read today?
I think I've said this before, the time while you're waiting for the verdict to be read when you know it's come in is always the most difficult time, I think, for either side, because you don't know which way it's going to go. When you hear it, you're obviously disappointed. We put a lot of time and effort. We knew this was a tough case, though. We basically won 4 of the 6 counts the way this case came in, and but we didn't win what we wanted to win. And so
Make no mistake, we lost
not
the
happy.
case. We lost the case. I'm very sad about that. I think it's just a sad day all around. I know that this will be a verdict that the Hallbachs hoped for and probably expected. I'm sure the Hallbach family and the people on the prosecution side are convinced of Stephen's guilt. We are not, so it's sad. It's sad to see someone you believe in and fear may well be innocent convicted. And again, that's not to express any disrespect for this jury. That this was an attentive, thoroughgoing jury.
You talked about this process as potentially being redemptive. You get a little emotional about it. Can you explain that, revisit that? I mean, now you've been through this process. Was it the redemption you hoped for?
No, redemption will have to wait, as it so often does in human affairs. It just will have to wait.
Can you explain, I mean, can you revisit for people who weren't here when you said it the first time, but why you thought this process was so very important for Stephen Avery in light of what happened to him in 1985?
I think it was more important for the citizens of Wisconsin in many ways. Stephen has, he did regain his liberty in 2003, but at a very personal level, when someone stumbles badly in his life, and as all of us do from time to time, the process of pulling yourself back up off your knees, dusting yourself off, and saying, I'm going to hold up my chin and go forward, has a redemptive quality for all of us, whether it's alcohol we struggle with, whether it's a divorce, whether it's some other personal tragedy or failing. And that's true in a larger collective societal sense, too. And our criminal justice system failed Stephen Avery badly in 1985. It failed him time and time again after 1985. I fear this is one more failure in spite of everyone's best efforts and honest efforts. So I'm very sad at a personal level this evening because I've lost a case. I'm sad at a broader level that in human life we just haven't mastered justice any better than we have.
How is Mrs. Avery doing, if you're willing to tell us that? And we did notice that his father was not in the courtroom. Can you kind of explain some stuff to us about
His
that?
father saw the verdict at a distance. Dolores is very discouraged, but she too is a strong person, and she has the support of a small family, but one that sticks together through bad times.
Dean, do you see this as any vindication for police, especially Colborne and Lank?
I do not. It certainly will be seen that way by some. It's hard for me to find any vindication here for anyone, and in the end, the justice system doesn't promise vindication, nor should it.
How long do you expect to stay on the case?
I don't
it's
know.
too early. Too early to tell.
Too early to tell.
Can you tell us why Mr. Avery's been in court, I think, almost every day of this trial. Can you tell us why he didn't come to the verdict?
I'd be intruding on his privacy. This is not a man who wears his emotions on his sleeve, and I'm not going to put them out on his sleeve for him.
Dean, you were quick to ask for post-conviction motions. Do you have a battle plan or a direction in mind, or is that something you'll have to...
Only in the most general way, Andy. It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. We've just been kicked in the gut. Battle plans probably will have to wait until Monday morning.
Do you guys work on this tomorrow? Do you go back to the office tomorrow? What do you do tomorrow?
We'll go back to the
We'll
office.
go back to the office. We'll be thinking about what we can do.
But also getting back to regular business as usual somewhat?
Well, this is unfortunately business as usual for us. We defend people in criminal cases, and that means losing lots of the time. Juries convict almost always, whether they should or shouldn't. That's what happens. So this is what our lives are about in large measure, and got one client for whom we hope to be able to do more, and others we hope to continue to do the best we can.
What are your words for the police and the prosecutors?
It's their day. They've been convinced of Mr. Avery's guilt. I'm not. At some broader level, I sure hope they're right. They've been convinced for a long time.
I think, despite the verdict, more of the public is unconvinced of Mr. Avery's guilt, certainly than there were before this trial began. I think you've seen it in your own contacts that you've had with the public. So if they think that it removed all doubt that the community had about what they did, how they handled this case, I think they're wrong, but only time will tell on that.
Mr. Buting, you're a passionate man, and we can tell right now you're probably angered slightly. Does this verdict anger you? I mean,
No, it's disappointing, and I mean, I think Dean said it as well as anybody can, that you just, we knew how difficult it is. You lose most cases, but you still hold out hope, and it just didn't turn out.
With all these weeks of testimony, is there, do you think, one or two key pieces of evidence or something that made the jury go one way or the other?
I don't. I'd be surprised. Of course, I'm not on the jury, and I haven't talked to the jurors any more than you have. But that would surprise me in a case where both the prosecution theory and the defense theory were largely circumstantial and really assembled from a mass of bits and pieces, rather than from a confession or an eyewitness or an alibi witness who could seal a defense. It's just not been that kind of case, so that would surprise me. But this is something the jurors, if they ever decide to share their counsel, would have to address. And I respect them, by the way, for tonight going home and keeping their own counsel for the time being.
No jurors. The sheriff's going to read a statement. Dean, I think it was you who has on a few occasions mentioned that in certain cases you actually grow to really like your client. And I got the impression that Steve Avery's one of them. Can you talk about that?
I didn't grow to like him in this case. I think I liked him the day I met him. Now, I was predisposed because I know well one of his lawyers from the civil case and respect that lawyer's opinion a great deal. But I hit it off with Stephen the day I first met him here in the Calumet County Jail in February of 2006 on what I recall as being a day where my car thermometer read 18 below zero on the way here to Chilton. I've not stopped liking him. He really does prove to be a likable man when you have a chance to spend time one-on-one with him. And what I feel is badly for him today and for his family. If I didn't like him, I probably would. But if it matters, I do like him.
You guys have said on a number of occasions to us that Steve Avery had no motive. Prosecutors worked very hard to introduce evidence that they thought would demonstrate a motive. Evidence about him burning a cat, and about pulling his cousin over at gunpoint. Can you talk about that?
Gosh, I still don't think there's ever been a motive. And Judge Willis found that a lot of this long-distance misconduct just was not relevant to motive. It didn't tend to establish a motive. I agreed heartily with that at the time. I still do. There's no motive here for which I can assign any weight at all. It's.
I mean, that was one of the things that we argued, that really no motive for anybody to do this crime had ever been established. No more motive on Mr. Avery's part than numerous other people who had the same access and opportunity. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to present in detail what those other people were and what their access and opportunities were to the jury. So, Mr. Avery was sort of hanging out there as the only one, if not him, then who? But the court, we have to respect the court's decision on our motion to try and get that evidence in as well, and ultimately whether it makes a difference or whether it made a difference to this jury, we'll never know.
One part of the great tragedy of Teresa Halbach's death is I can't imagine a person in the world who had a motive to kill this young woman, who had a reason to do it. It's just one part of a great personal tragedy and an often repeated human tragedy.
So do you think that there's a killer out there that the police have not caught?
Absolutely. I mean, that's been our position all along.
But that's always true. That's always true. People have been killing one another and since we walked out of caves, and not every murderer gets caught. We live with this. It's a strange thing about human beings.
Do you think the guilty verdict on the homicide makes it more likely or less likely that Brendan Dassey would be found guilty of that?
We're not going to comment on Brendan Dassey's case
about
at all.
Neither should you. How's that for being judgmental on a day of judgments here? This is a kid who has a trial upcoming, and I'd like to see him start with a stronger presumption of innocence than his adult uncle was able to.